Good evening everyone. Tonight I'm cooking for dinner just a homemade meatloaf. It's a favourite as well at our house. I have two teenage boys, so one is 16 and one is nearly 18. So making budget meals is something that we've become quite used to in our house. Finding affordable meals that are going to fill them up if they want to have more than one serving. So this is a good meal. I serve this with mashed potatoes and vegetables. So tonight we're going to have this with mashed potatoes and green beans. But I'm just going to show you how to actually make the meatloaf. So I'm going to go through the ingredients with you now. So it's a pretty simple recipe. We have 2 eggs, salt and pepper, onion powder, paprika. I use a tiny bit of coffee, so grounded coffee. I've got 2 tablespoons of stock. I usually use beef or vegetable, whatever I've got. This is actually a beef. I've also got a whole container, 250 mils of the spicy red fountain sauce. So you'll use half in your mix for your meatloaf and half for your sauce on top, which we'll show you. A little bit of Worcestershire sauce, which will go in the mix and you'll see later. Some parsley, any herbs that you've got at home, parsley is a good one. We've got some cloves of garlic, which I'm going to mince up when we make our meatloaf. You can use half an onion or a whole onion that will be diced. I use my chopper to dice all that up. A whole carrot. You can put celery in this. I usually do. I just don't have any today, but usually just chop up a couple of sticks of celery. I've got 1 kilo of mince here, so I'm going to use that for tonight. And then for the topping, the glaze that we will use, we'll be using just the tomato sauce, and then breadcrumbs, and I'll be doing some grated Parmesan cheese to make it a crusty top for the top of the meatloaf. So all you need for this is any kind of baking dish that would fit the size of your meat. So you're making like a log out of it. Some people use a loaf tin. I just find this works just as easily. You can just use any baking dish and make it the size of the dish because you're going to cut it up anyway. People can add other vegetables to their meatloaf like peas, other grated zucchini. My kids don't particularly like that, so this is just what's catered for our family. So we'll get started. The thing that we're going to do is we're going to put our onion that has been finely chopped and our carrot and our garlic into the bowl. We're then going to add our mince, just breaking that up nicely. I like to wear a pair of gloves for this because it can get a little bit messy. And then into that we're going to add our eggs, our tomato sauce, our stock, our coffee, our herbs and spices, and our Worcestershire sauce. Okay, and then using our hands, we're just going to mix all of that together. Okay, so halfway through that, we're just going to add a little bit of our breadcrumbs. Okay. Okay, just mixing that through. So once that's done, I'm just going to grab the piece of baking paper that we've got to fit the size of our tray, and we're going to grab out our meatloaf. Okay, and we're going to shape it into the shape of a loaf. Then we're going to pop it into our baking dish. Just like that. Okay, so the next part, we're just going to put the glaze straight over the top of the meatloaf. Now to make our glaze, you can simply just use the sauce that's left, which is about a half a bottle of sauce, or you can use about 1/4 cup of apple cider vinegar with the sauce. So I'm doing that tonight. So I'm just going to mix the sauce with the vinegar. Okay. And you can also add a bit of sugar to this if you want, but we're trying to be pretty healthy at the moment, so no sugar is going to be added to this glaze, but you can add a brown sugar or caster sugar if you like. Okay. So we're just going to pour that glaze over the top of our meatloaf. And I should have mentioned, we've got our oven that's been preheated for 180 degrees, so I put that on just before I started mixing my meatloaf. Okay, so I'm just going to pull the sides so that the sauce kicks right down in the sides, but it will seep into the meatloaf as it's cooking. Now, this will go into the oven at 180 degrees for about 35 to 40 minutes. In the last 10 minutes of that cooking, we're going to get it out so that we can put our crusty top on the top of this glaze, which will be a mixture of breadcrumbs, Parmesan cheese, and a little bit extra of our parsley and our herbs. So we'll make that mix up while it is in the oven cooking. All right, so for our cheesy crusty top, I have just put in a bowl the Parmesan cheese that I've finely grated, the breadcrumbs, the leftover herbs, the paprika, the onion, and I'm going to add a little bit of salt and pepper to that. And then I'm going to mix all of that through. Okay, and then 10 minutes before our meatloaf is ready, we're going to sprinkle that on top and put it back in the oven for the last 10 minutes, which will give it a nice crunchy top. Alright, so we've just pulled our meatloaf out of the oven. It's been about 30 minutes, and I'm going to put it actually back in for another 15. It's a big piece of meat. It's cooking quite nicely. The juices are starting to form, and we're going to add the crunchy top to that. So the juices is a good thing because at the end of the meatloaf, when it's finished cooking, we can actually scoop those juices out and make a sauce out of it to drizzle over our meatloaf. So we just over the top of the glaze. My kids say you can never have too much topping. Nice and crunchy. Make sure that's evenly spread all over our meatloaf. So now we're going to pop that back into the oven for another 15 minutes on 180 degrees. Okay, so we've just taken our meatloaf out of the oven, and you can see that it's nice and golden on top. There is a little bit of sauce that's accumulated around the sides, which we are going to scoop out over the top of our sliced meatloaf. So we've taken our meatloaf and we've chopped it up into sizes for depending on who you're feeding. So I'm obviously feeding teenage boys and they like a big generous serve. So we've chopped that up, we've drizzled a bit of the excess sauce over the top, and I'm serving it with some mashed potato and some green beans. Thank you for listening. Have a nice night.